This video is sponsored by Backbone, more on them later. Hey, what happens when you die? Yeah, okay, it's probably not going to become that kind of video, but stick with me because while I don't fancy a metaphysical deep dive on the afterlife, I could go for a showcase of video games doing cool things when you run out of health. You know how normal video games do it, you take too much damage or fall into the bottomless pit, take that fat L, and then respawn at the nearest checkpoint. That's fine, but a tad boring, and with how long video games have been going on for, you better believe that we can do something a lot more exciting. Dying is like a lot of things in video games. Just because most games don't elaborate further doesn't mean that some others don't go absolutely nutso in pursuit of making their game interesting. Just because you die doesn't mean that the game that you're playing won't beat you over the head every time it happens. It's just an occupational hazard, isn't it? And I don't want to have to worry about anything like that when I'm playing games on my phone, which is why I'm so happy that this video is sponsored by Backbone. Gaming on mobile phones has come along leaps and bounds over the years, and Backbone are seeking to launch it into the stratosphere with their controller that seamlessly attaches to your smartphone and effortlessly converts it into a next-gen games console. With it, you can play a huge array of games ranging from App Store titles like Call of Duty Mobile to console and PC games by using Remote Play in what personally feels like a really comfortable version. There's even the Backbone app that keeps everything neatly organized in one place, and it's the perfect way to connect with friends and discover new games to play with your Backbone. Whether you're on the go and new to video games or a seasoned pro who wants some of that sweet remote play, Backbone can easily accommodate you. So if you want one of these bad boys yourself, you can go to playbackbone.com or use the link in the description, or even scan this QR code and it will take you exactly where you need to go. Thank you to Backbone for sponsoring this video. Anyway, it's time to die, I guess. Few genres of games have as close a relationship with death as horror games. To specify, zombie survival games, since as soon as you make the main threat of a game the living undead, the player becomes surrounded by this looming dread that you might join them one day. I mean, not really though. I know if this was happening in real life, you'd have this morbid reflection of humanity that would make your actions difficult to swallow, but video game zombies are just moving targets for your weapons and rarely anything more than that. However, a select few zombie games have taken a far more interesting approach to what happens when they bite too many chunks out of you, and in that category, the often forgotten Zombie U reigns supreme. For what was a launch title for the Wii U, it feels like Ubisoft pumped as much creativity as they could into a fairly standard zombie game in order to elevate it to the standard that very deliberately shows off the new tech and a handful of interesting creative decisions. This isn't just using a cricket bat to cave in some skulls, governor, or all the cool stuff with the gamepad. This is becoming a zombie when you die. Which is like, that's just what happens, isn't it? Like, of course you become a zombie when you die. It's not like you've downed some magic protagonist juice before stepping out into the apocalypse, which means that you don't have to play by the same rules as everyone else. Zombie U is firing all cylinders with this idea, since not only does it force you to move on to a different survivor after each death, meaning that you're not respawning so much as you're brain hopping, I guess. It also has that Dark Souls in it too. Yeah, okay, so that's a dangerous comparison to make at the best of times, but in the same way as Dark Souls has you drop all of your souls in a neat little pile on the ground upon death, Zombie U has a very similar system where you can Zerg rush your corpse and pillage the good stuff. Except it's not a corpse in a zombie apocalypse, is it? Now you've got to fight your previous, now zombified character if you want your stuff back, which is kind of incredible if you've grown attached to the character. Even crazier, the further you go into the game, the more stuff you'll have had at the time of death, and robbing this new zombie becomes both more challenging and more rewarding. I need every zombie game to do this from now on. Roguelikes are pretty much the poster child genre for using death in cool ways. I guess they don't have to because yes, these are randomly generated and that's basically their main shtick, but sometimes the main creative games push the boat out that just a little bit more and have an interesting mechanic for when your current run meets its inevitable conclusion. The main point of progression in a roguelike is that despite coming to the end of a run, you're making some form of progression on the game as a whole. Hades is a game that is naturally very fond of Greek mythology, and if you know anything about that, it'll probably be how much the underworld plays a part in basically everything that every character does. So in Hades, the video game, death is the punishment that accompanies running out of health, but it's not exactly a punishment per se. So Hades is quite a challenging game. Roguelikes are comfortable enough with the concept of death and ending runs, so they ramp up the difficulty, but Hades is so at home with death that it literally treats death as a home. The House of Hades is where you go when you die, and surprise surprise, it isn't all that bad at all. On the contrary, this is where Hades slows down and almost becomes somewhat of an RPG with all of its character interactions and questing, as you use every death as an opportunity to network with fellow underworld dwellers and look to set yourself up for the next run in the best way possible. It creates this strange sort of paradox where you are naturally concerned about dying during your average run of Hades, but at the same time, you needn't be too worried since you need to die in order to chat to the right character and get those RPG wheels turning. You're not punished for dying. In a weird roundabout way, you're basically rewarded for dying, and in a game about escaping the underworld, I couldn't think of a better way of doing it. Way to flip the script on that one. You know what, I've realised that this video is all about punishing a player for dying, which may sound redundant considering that running out of health already pushes you back to an earlier point in the game, but I don't know, sometimes that just isn't enough. In the right hands, it can fundamentally change how you approach a video game, and last year's Sifu is one of the best examples of how a cool death mechanic can make all the difference. If you saw some out-of-context gameplay of Sifu, you wouldn't be able to grasp why death makes this game sing, but to be fair, it's baked right there in the narrative as a way of delaying death at a cost. You see, Sifu is a beat-em-up, so you're playing around as a character who moves a certain way and has certain stats, and part of the challenge is understanding how you channel his abilities into a cohesive set of combos. In any other game, this would be the basic loop of Sifu, but any gameplay footage has your age in the top left for some reason, so what's this all about then? Well, you see, Sifu has a surprise up its sleeve that it only whips out to play with when you die. This magical talisman plays an important part in the story, and when you die, it resurrects you so you can keep fighting, but the trade-off is that every time you die, your character gets a little bit older. You can keep doing this for a while, all the way up until the ripe old age of 78, at which point any subsequent loss of life will be handled the more traditional way, and you'll just die. On its own, this is an awesome mechanic that makes death really significant, since this gives Sifu a reason to track your deaths, and you can even see your character physically age up every time. But hey, there's more, because every death will make your character stronger, and yet you'll have less health, which is thematically appropriate as a way of indicating gained experience with age at the cost of a frailer body, but it also makes you more of a glass cannon, so you have to keep that in mind after every death. Honestly, every game could do this, and I really wouldn't mind. Need some developers to take notes, please. I simply can't cover a topic like this without addressing what many believe to be the first mainstream-ish franchise to have some kind of significant punishment when you die. It's not technically true, is it? Arcade games were very clear with what the price of failure was, and dying enough time literally costs you more money to retry, so technically that would count as some sort of elevated form of dying in a video game. You feel the humiliation of death, and whoops, now you're all so poor. When you see it like that, then evidently the next natural step would be for your playable characters to suffer from permadeath if you become a little too avant-garde with your tactics. Fire Emblem is a godsend when it comes to finding a really significant way to feel failure, since as we all know by now, any disposable units that die in the older games stay dead even if you go on to complete the chapter. Which is completely crazy when you think about it, especially for a series of games that has been doing this pretty much unchanged since 1990. Actually, when you do think about it, it's kind of morbid for a Nintendo game. Even at their darkest, they never really showcase any real consequences for dying. I know Majora's Mask is a dramatic end-of-the-world cutscene that scorches the land and everyone who lived there, but you can just reset and try again. Fire Emblem is really the only Nintendo franchise where not only is there a very real chance that characters will die outside of story events, but their deaths make every subsequent chapter so much more complicated for you. Death matters so much in Fire Emblem that it's practically the main gameplay mechanic of the franchise. It's the reason why you might get invested in it. Even the more recent games that attempted to make Fire Emblem more accessible to newer players by making permadeath optional, even they have managed to retain the all-consuming dread that a big enough mistake can have serious consequences. Yeah, it's all shiny and new, but it still retains the infamous DNA of its predecessors, and it will fuck you up if you're not careful. You gotta look after yourself and your people. I'm loving Zombie U's vibe, but I think we can go even further. I love the idea of your death creating this extra challenge in the game world, and having to defeat a strong zombie so that you can rescue your items is just the sort of punishment that should come with losing all of your health. In a larger world though, you kinda need to expand this idea a bit, and obviously there was something in the water in the early 2010s, because 2 years after Ubisoft made Zombie U, Monolith was showing where this idea should end up with Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor and its incredibly memorable Nemesis system. I have never played a game that has so fundamentally changed the dynamics surrounding regular enemy encounters in the same way as Shadow of Mordor, which not only gave normal enemies a hierarchy so that some of them are more valuable to kill than others, but it also helps to give these enemies a form of progression among their ranks. And how do they get stronger and become more important? Oh yeah, you gotta die. Not that that is too challenging, since Shadow of Mordor is perfectly capable of wiping the floor with you if you're not being careful, but the Nemesis system really comes into its own when you're given a reason to remember any one of these enemies. I remember that the early trailers for Shadow of Mordor tried really hard to push the Nemesis system as much as possible, and there was definitely a worry that it'd end up feeling like a gimmick, but damn, it sure does make its way into every tiny part of the game. Dying to an enemy in Shadow of Mordor may have the relatively simple knock-on effect of being the best day of this orc's life, with the added bonus of ruining his mood when you come back from the dead, but it creates this awesomely complex method of generating storylines from scratch. You die to one bad guy and suddenly he's leveled up as an enemy, so that getting your revenge isn't the simple task that it once was. And it's stuff like this that not only kept Shadow of Mordor engaging for a long time, since you're just generating more significant villains for you to kill, but the Nemesis system found its way into the sequel without too many necessary changes. The irony at this late stage of the video is that despite all of the other death systems I've talked about so far being cool enough for me to want them in other games, Warner Brothers has now patented the Nemesis system, and it literally can't be used in other games. And just like that, it's the publisher that has leveled up as a bad guy after all. And yeah, those are my picks of the games where dying is really important. Do you agree, or is there something else you'd have at number 1? Let me know in a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and hit subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of new uploads. If you need something else to watch right now, I talked about scariest hidden lore last time. And I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Scott Riker, and Sarah Mallion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.